Everyone, this video is just a supplement to the reading on Kantian ethics. Again, these videos are not meant to be comprehensive. They're just something that's added on to the reading, just because I think I'd like to explain a few points in my own way that I think are important, and also just emphasize things that I think are particularly important. But the text is quite good. It stands on its own. So again, you should be basing your preparation, especially for the exams, on reading the text, not just these videos. But that being said, let's talk about Kantianism. Actually, before we talk about Kantianism, let's talk about utilitarianism, what we were looking at in the last section. As it's important to distinguish the utilitarian approach from the Kantian approach to ethics, to morality, and I think the most basic point of contrast is that utilitarianism is a form of consequentialism. Consequentialism would be any moral philosophy that says that what makes an action good or bad, what gives it its moral value, is its consequences, its effects, its results. So any utilitarianism says that what makes an action good or bad is its effect on happiness, and let's just say for the moment human happiness, or human welfare, or its utility for human beings. So that qualifies it as a form of consequentialism. So we can say, from a utilitarian point of view, we look at the effects of an action. We can't really tell, especially if we're doing act utilitarianism as opposed to rule utilitarianism. We can't really tell whether an action is good or bad until we know its results, its consequences. That is not true of Kantian ethics, of Kantian moral theory. So for Kant, if you were to say, let's say you're doing an analysis of something on the basis of Kantianism, if you were to say that somebody did something wrong because it had bad effects on somebody else, that would be wrong. That's not the way to approach something as a Kantian. For a Kantian, the motive is everything, meaning the intention behind an action. The intention behind an action is what determines its moral value. So right away, that's a big contrast with utilitarianism. And you can say, well, okay, if it's the intention behind an action, the intention with which somebody does something, that determines its moral value. That is, determines whether it's good or bad or neither. Well, what is the intention that is the one that actually makes an action good, that gives it moral value? For Kant, it's whether or not an action is done with goodwill. Right? This is very important for Kant. I mean, a goodwill, he says, is the only thing that's absolutely good in itself. So if you do something with a goodwill, then the results of your actions, the consequences, are immaterial. If it's done with a goodwill, it's a good action. And that's it. We don't have to look at its effects. We don't have to look at its results. We don't have to look at its impact on human welfare like we do if we're utilitarians. It's whether it's done with a goodwill. Then the next question is, what is a goodwill? That is, how do we know that the will behind an action is good? That's a very important question. And he has an answer for that, and that's covered in the reading fairly well, and that's duty. That is, a good will is a will that is prompted by duty, or we can even say so that's why duty is such an important part of Kantian ethics, because it really defines the will, the goodwill, and the goodwill is the will that gives an action moral worth, positive moral worth, you can say. But there's one more question, and that's duty to what? That is, there's no such thing as a free floating duty. If I do something out of duty, I have something that I have a duty towards. So if you were to say, well, what Joe did was good because he did it out of duty, then unless you can say what it is that Joe recognized he had a duty to, then what you're saying doesn't really make much sense. There's no such thing as just doing something out of duty. It has to be duty to something. And he has an answer to that. The duty is always to the moral law, and only to the moral law. So this sequence of thinking, which I think is my personal way of thinking about Kantianism, is actually quite important. To recognize that, okay, the motive is what determines the moral value of an action, and it's a good will that makes it a good action. A good will is something that is a will that is prompted by a recognition of duty, and that duty is always to the moral law. It's not duty to another human being, duty to your country, duty to your family. No, it's duty to the moral law, something bigger than you, something bigger than everybody. But this, I think this might be our next question. What does it mean to do something out of duty to the moral law? And I think that this is where the categorical imperatives come in, which is the heart and soul of Kantian ethics, Kantian moral theory, the categorical imperatives, at least the first two. Ethics for A level goes into the third categorical imperative, which I don't think is really anywhere near as important or useful as the first two. But all of them have to do with lawfulness. And categorical imperatives are rules to follow, which ensure that you're staying within the boundaries of your duty, so that if you were to transgress against the categorical imperatives, you would know that you were transgressing your duty, and you would know, therefore, that doing such a thing would be morally wrong. So the categorical imperatives are rules that ensure that you stay within the boundaries of what your duty is under the moral law. The first categorical imperative is to act so that your maxim of action can serve as a law for everyone. Your maxim is your rule of action. So when you're thinking of doing something, you have to stop and ask yourself, well, what would be the rule that I would be following here? And then you have to ask yourself whether that rule could serve as a universal law, as a law for everyone. So it's a two-step process, actually applying the first categorical imperative. So if the upshot is if the answer is yes, that is, your action can serve as a law for everyone, and this is a judgment that you need to make, no one can make it for you, then you know that your action is moral and you can do it. If your answer is no, then you know your action is immoral and you shouldn't do it. The second categorical imperative to treat other persons and yourself always as ends in themselves, never as mere means to one of your ends. So this is, here you have to make sure that you understand the difference, the distinction between means and ends, right? It's a very simple distinction, but we mess it up all the time. If I get up and I walk out my door and walk to the store to get a gallon of milk, then the end is having the gallon of milk. The means is walking to the store. Okay. And the means is the way you get there. The end is the goal or object. It's very important, not just in Kantian ethics, but generally in philosophy and life, to make sure that you understand that distinction. Okay. A means is a way. An end is the goal or purpose. Okay. All right. So what Kant is saying here, I don't know. It's interesting. Treating everyone as an end in themselves is a little vague. I'm not really sure and never sure what that means. Now, the next part of it, I think, is a lot easier to nail down. Never treat somebody as a mere means, as a way, as an instrument to the gaining of one of your ends. It is a very useful principle. Basically, I mean, it can be interpreted in different ways, but one of the things it's saying is don't use people, don't exploit them, treat them with respect, acknowledge their dignity, and don't treat them like a thing, treat them like a person. It's actually quite important. Both of them are quite important. But these are, explained along with different things. The last thing that I want to emphasize with you is just, and I'm not sure this is totally explained in the text, why are they called categorical imperatives? Right? That's really important in a philosophy class that studies Kantian moral theory, is to understand the words that you're using. Right? If you don't understand what you're saying, then you don't understand the material. Right? So what does it mean for something to be a categorical imperative? Just break it down. First, we ask ourselves, what is an imperative? Look it up. Google it, man. Look it up in the dictionary. And what does it mean for something to be categorical? Okay. Look it up. Imperative is easy. Imperative means a command or order. So we know that a categorical imperative is a command. Do this or don't do that. The harder word is categorical. And what does categorical means? What does categorical mean? Well, one of the things it means is exceptionless and unconditional. So when we state something categorically, we're stating it without any conditions or exceptions or qualifications. If I say today is Saturday, I'm stating it categorically. If I say, well, if I don't have to go to work, then it's Saturday, then I'm stating something conditionally. Right? I'm not sure if it's Saturday, but I say, well, if I don't have to go to work, then it's Saturday. But if I just say it's Saturday, I'm saying it's categorical. So a categorical imperative is just do this, no qualifications, no exceptions, no conditions specifying when you would need to do it or when you would not need to do it. The idea is that these two rules are always valid and that it is never okay to violate them. That's what it means for something to be a categorical imperative.